Hey everybody, it's that Sunday School Girl of thatsundayschoolgirl.com. Welcome to the lesson for this Sunday, June 11th. I trust that you had a great week. It was a very busy one once again for me. We have just wrapped up our 2017 Auxiliaries and Ministry Convention in the Kansas East jurisdiction of the Church of God in Christ, and I am so blessed to serve under the leadership of Bishop L.F. Thusten, and I am one of the co-chairs of that convention. And so, again, a busy week, but a great week, celebrating the 5 auxiliaries that make up the AIM Convention and serving the saints of the Kansas East jurisdiction. It is the weekend. I'm sure that you have something great planned, and as you see, I'm already dressed and ready to go out and face the day. It's another full one for us. And I do hope that you have Sunday school on your weekend plans. I know there's a lot going on. There are parades and festivals and picnics, and we're getting started with all of that kind of stuff. But I want you to make sure that you're very intentional about Sunday school. As for me, as soon as I finish this video, I've got to run one of our guests to the airport from the convention, and then I will be headed to the service of our next door neighbor. As you can tell, I'm in Mom's house this morning. Some of your moms had this gold mirror too, but I'll be going to her homegoing celebration. My father built this house exactly 40 years ago, and when we got here, our neighbors, the Mannings, were the first people that we met, and they have been special to us. They have been family to us, and so we're going to miss Mrs. Iona Manning. Funny story, when I was a little girl, when we moved in, I could not say the last name Manning, but I did like mayonnaise, and so for many years, they were Mr. and Mrs. Mayonnaise to me until I could get that last name right. So I appreciate God for allowing our paths to cross. I am so blessed to be part of a wonderful community of people who have been part of investing in me, building, and in my growth and development, and the Mannings were certainly a big part of that, and so she will be missed. That will be a big void in this neighborhood, but I can't help but celebrate God and thank Him for what He's done. And so we'll be doing that a little bit later this morning, but I hope again that you have something wonderful planned, and yes, you should be in Sunday school in the morning. No excuses. Because just like last weekend, if there's anybody who could use an extra 90 minutes of sleep, because I fly back to Texas after all this is over tonight. So if anybody wants to lay down in the morning, it's me. But no, we are all going to get up and we're going to be in Sunday school. If you're new around here, welcome. You have just joined the largest cyber community on the World Wide Web for Sunday school study, and I am excited that you're here. We are an engaged community of learners, and I appreciate you being here. If you'll do me a favor, everyone, and make sure that you hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss any content that comes out on the channel, and make sure that you elect to turn on your notifications so that you get the email immediately when content is updated. I think that's it for me this morning because I'm going to be running here very quickly, and I don't want to short the lesson, so let's get into it for today. Using my TSSG app this morning, our lesson is Gideon's call. The Bible basis is Judges chapter 6, verses 11 through 18. The Bible truth: God chooses wisely to fulfill His plans. The memory verse is from verse 12, and the lesson aim is that we will decide that God's criteria for choosing leaders differs from those set by humans, except when we feel unqualified for a task because of perceived inadequasies, and confirm the appropriateness of voicing doubts about personal capabilities and requesting signs in a 21st century context. So we talked about the fact that we're going to be in Judges for just a few more weeks, and we did some setup last week as we looked at the pattern of the children of Israel, this cycle that they seemingly always went through: disobedience, discipline, desperation, and then crying out for God's deliverance. Now, as a reminder, the book of Judges is written after the time of Joshua, so it's after he and the elders after him had died. And because the children of Israel did not drive out all of the pagan influence, they married the pagans, they served their gods, they found themselves moving into very challenging places when God would withdraw His hand from them and let them see what it was like to be as great as they thought on their own, thinking that they didn't need Him. In our lesson today, we're about 40 years after the time of oppression that we saw in last week's lesson. But once again, they've fallen into that cycle of sin and they need a deliverer. They're in the promised land, but they have strayed from the will of God. And so in this text, they are suffering under the hands of the Midianites. And so it's a very difficult time and they are desperate. They need to be delivered. They want to be delivered, and they are ready to cry out for help. In Judges, we continually see themes of God's mercy and His compassion, and that's exactly what we will see in this lesson. Now, the book of Judges is appropriately themed Judges because we learn of judges, and they were people, as we saw in last week's lesson, both women and men who were chosen, in fact, raised up and anointed with the Spirit of God to deliver Israel from her enemies. And these people were leaders, both military and civic, and they ruled Israel for about 350 years. Now, there were 15 judges, and they were from 9 different tribes, and Samuel was the only one to rule over the entire nation. So here's my question for this week. I've told you there are 15 judges. I've given you one. Can you list for me, name all 15 judges? So right, wrong, or indifferent, there are a lot of times that we don't move when we're supposed to because we lack faith or because we lack confidence. And that's what we're going to see in this lesson with Gideon's call. But we're also going to see that he overcame that and moved into a place of obedience. Now, it's important to go back and sort of read some things that have happened up before the actual printed text starting in verse 11. But if you go back to verse 8, what you'll see is that God has given a message of hope. He sent a prophet to the children of Israel to say to them that the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt and out of the house of bondage, I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and out of all of them that oppressed you and drove you out of their land. And I said unto you, I am the Lord your God. Fear not the God of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell, but ye have not obeyed my voice. But inside of that was the hope to remind them that he was the God who had always delivered them. And they forgot that when they got into these cycles, they forgot that it was God who brought them out, and they did not serve him faithfully. So in this lesson, we meet Gideon in verse 11, and the angel of the Lord is sitting under a tree, and this certain type of tree is listed as an oak tree, but it may have been used for staining or to make turpentine. But this particular tree belonged to Joash, the Bezerite, who was actually Gideon's father. And again, this is at the time that they are being oppressed. The children of Israel are being oppressed by the Midianites, and Gideon is here. He's working. He's threshing wheat. He's beating it. And typically in that day when you were threshing wheat, you would thresh it against the floor, and there would be a place nearby where there would be oxen that would tread out the grain. And so he's working, but he's working only with a small portion and not the entire harvest, because he doesn't want the Midianites to see everything that he has. He's actually, we already see some fear there inside of him because he doesn't want the Midianites to know everything. So he's working to go undetected. So again, we already see his fear. And we're familiar with the Midianites. We've seen them. They are an enemy, but we also remember back Moses married a Midianite. So we've seen the Midianites in scriptural texts. Verse 12 says that this angel begins to talk to Gideon, and he gives Gideon a message from God, that God is with him. And even though Gideon is being somewhat fearful, somewhat timid, he calls him a mighty man of valor. And there's some debate and commentary as to whether that was past, present, or future. But he says to him that no matter how you see yourself, this message from God is that you are a mighty man of valor. And Gideon's question is, if God is with us, then why is all this going on? Why are we being oppressed? Where are the signs, the miracles, wonders? Where is that among us? God has left us out here in the hands of the Midianites. And there are times that difficulties come in our own lives, and we ask the question, why? And that's exactly what Gideon has asked, is why. Verse 14 says that God gives him the commandment, and he has an assurance. He has the commandment to go. And the question is, didn't I send you? God was not sending Gideon out there all on his own. He was sending him because he had already given him the strength inside that he needed to be successful. And because God was sending Gideon, the one thing that was sure is that he could not fail. But Gideon did not have that confidence, and we see that in verse 15, because he begins to make excuses, and he's like, who, me? And, then he talks about all the reasons why it shouldn't be me. My family, my clan is poor. And even of the poor people, I'm the weakest one out here. I'm not the one you want out here. So in his genealogy, his clan, his family was the weaker in the weaker half of Joseph's children. And the job that he was being given was a big job. This was a big battle. And he couldn't see how little old me was going to help fix this big, big problem. Sometimes your part can seem so small, but it's the enemy's trick to make you believe that even your small contribution, or however you view yourself, isn't important or isn't significant enough. But Proverbs 23:7 says that as a man thinketh, so is he. And that's why our confidence is important. When we struggle in times of low self-esteem, we actually end up being destructive to ourselves and destructive to the things that God wants to accomplish, because we don't go in the strength of God and we doubt his ability to work through us. And so he begins again to make excuses as to all the reasons that God cannot use him, but God is powerful and God is sovereign. In verse 16, he says, I will be with you and you're going to be successful. You're going to strike the Midianites and it's going to be like you're only fighting against one person. Now, Gideon had already disclosed that I don't have the wealth and I don't have the resources, but what he did have was what the Midianites did not have, and that was that he had God on his side. So he was going up against a military power who had great strength and great weaponry, but we have to remember that the battle does not belong to us alone, and the battle is not even flesh and blood. So he empowers us, God empowers us and strengthens us for the fight, but most of all, he had already promised him the victory. The thing is, we don't always get the plan. We like to know the details. We like to know how things are going to work out. We want to know the how, but we have to move in the assurance of God's presence and his provision. But Gideon still isn't so sure. Verse 17 says that he seeks a sign. He wants assurance. That's the fleece test we hear about sometimes, where he says, if this is what you want me to do, then this is what I need you to do to show me that it's really you. And we do that. We're guilty. I am totally guilty of fleece testing God. And, sometimes I tease and I say, listen, God, I need like a voice. I need the thunderous voice. I need it out of smoke, a mountain thunder. That's even my story like with law school. I had taken the LSAT. I had applied for law school. I was admitted into 5 of them, but I was still working a full-time job. And you know how this goes. If you're new, when the water is troubled, I abuse the scripture, I have no man to throw me in. I'm a single female. And so this idea of walking off of a perfectly good job with, good pay and benefits and everything that I needed, even though I was admitted, I could not see myself walking away from that. And I said, well, God, all along, if this is not what I'm supposed to do, don't let me pass the LSAT, please test. God, if this is not what I'm supposed to do, then don't even let me get admitted. Please test. Then I was admitted. God, if this is not what I'm supposed to do, then don't let me get any scholarship. Please test. I got scholarship. God, if this is what I'm supposed to do, I'm on a perfectly good job and I can't walk off from this. I just can't do this. Literally 9 days before orientation started for me in law school, I was laid off from my job. That's that smoke, the mountain, the thunderous voice. So again, many of us want God to show us a sign. We want that assurance that God is with us. And that's what Gideon shows here. And as we know, if you read on, you'll see that fire came down and totally consumed the sacrifice. And the story goes on to tell us that Gideon does go into battle. And the word was that he would strike and fight as if it were one person. Go and read the story. Gideon is forced to whittle. He has this group that's going to fight with him, but God calls him to whittle that down. He whittles down basically to a ratio of one of his men to 450 Midianites, and God gave them great victory and deliverance. Yes, Gideon did lack initially the faith that he needed, but what is important is not that we get nervous, but that we obey. And that's the big takeaway for me, is that he obeyed. Here are my key learnings from this week. And there are many. Sometimes it is difficult for us to see ourselves being used by God for whatever those reasons may be, and how we view our own capabilities or even the things in our past that we think discount us from being used. We can take authority over these thoughts, because these thoughts will do one of two things. They will either stifle us or become stepping stones. And so we can't allow ourselves into the place that we're stifled and do absolutely nothing. Why? Because it is the enemy's job to plant seeds of doubt, not only in our capabilities, but that of the capability of our God and God's ability to use us. And he loves it when we're fearful, when we're uncertain. And how do I know that that's the enemy? Because God doesn't He doesn't give us the spirit of fear. The Bible tells us that that's not from him. And so he doesn't want us to be anxious or apprehensive. And we're only limited by what we think we can accomplish. But God has many, many ways that he can solve the problem. And quite frankly, he's not asking us to come up with the plan. He is only requiring us to move forth in obedience, to be courageous and to be confident. And we have to be bold for God. When Gideon was thrashing wheat, he wasn't working with the entire harvest. He was working with just a little. He abandoned the big harvest to work with just a small piece because he was concerned with what someone else would find out. If you're going to go for God, go big or go home. God is looking for people who will raise up and who will stand for him. And we can't do that making excuses. So what excuse is it that you are using for not doing what God told you to do or accepting God's assignment? This week I challenge you to get rid of the excuses because we have to be busy for God. And again, there is no sin in asking God for that assurance to know. Just sometimes you just need to know, but more than anything, what he wants from us is our obedience. He wants us to be confident. He doesn't want us to be reluctant. He simply wants our obedience. And simply interesting to me is the fact that during difficult times, that's when the best parts of us sometimes shine during those challenging times. And it's because God can cause us to be successful even when the situation seems stacked against us, even when it seems that we're outnumbered, that God can move us from fearful to fearless. And in this case, he moved a man who considered himself a zero to being a hero. Look, this is this week's lesson. I look forward to hearing what you've learned from it. Look, give me comments below. If this lesson was helpful, give me thumbs up. And I've got to run. It's time to run to the airport. But listen, have a fantastic weekend. And I will see you in Sunday school. Bye-bye.